real noodles. So I'm having fake noodles.
Don't go there. Don't go there.
Yeah.
Can you get good noodles in London?
Sorry?
Can you get good noodles in London?
Japanese, yes. Chinese, not so much.
Oh man, that's such a shame.
It is. During COVID, I attempted twice. One is making bao, which was a huge success, but I can't be asked to go through it again. It's just too much effort. And I made also buckwheat noodles. Would be fine. But the thing is, in London, the water is so shitty. Mm-hmm. So to make that, you need really good water, and it really is not happening. Yeah.
Hey, so there's a cha soba in Japan you can get. They put matcha into the noodles.
Oh yeah, I did that as well last Christmas.
You had some? Yeah, that's really nice. I like.
Wait,
that.
We can have matcha noodles?
Yeah, you can have matcha noodles. Yeah, it's called cha soba. It's like buckwheat noodles, green buckwheat noodles.
You know, you can actually have all sorts of noodles with tea crushed in. Like we made pu'er noodle once. It was pretty smoky. Really good with I had it with some dark thigh. Somehow it works really well.
Does it work well with duck shit?
Probably. I haven't tried that. I should. Oolong is just so frequent. The possibility is endless.
Isn't it honeysuckle?
Sorry?
Isn't duck shit actually honeysuckle? I mean, the original name or something was honeysuckle? The duck shit oolong.
The noodles, you mean?
Oh, no.
He's talking about the tea. The oolong.
Oh, sorry. Sam has switched on my Chinese food brain.
That memes just don't ask questions and just eat it.
Exactly.
Well, there's
until
Jeremy.
They start serving dog.
Oh,
hey,
dog.
Jeremy. It's Ray here.
Hi.
Hi, Jeremy. How's it going, buddy?
Good. Hopefully this will work.
It looks like
Computer's
it's working.
been failing me the last few weeks, but hopefully it won't today.
How's your new place?
It's good.
You're happy?
Yeah, it worked out really well because it's kind of like the first time I've been ever able to centralize things. So it's not like, store this here, pack this at this place, not running around town having to do multiple things. So it's a lot better for that reason.
Good. How's Terre Haute? Everything pretty much fully back open and you guys staying safe?
Yeah, we're in phase 3, which means we're almost completely fully open. And I think there's only 220 cases in Vigo County. We have like a 3% positive test rate, so it really hasn't affected us nowhere near like it affected other places.
Yeah.
We're going the opposite direction.
Yeah, it's weird because what it means is that nobody here cares. You probably see like a quarter of the people with masks, maybe. So you would think since there's such a casual attitude here that it would somehow find a way to spread, but I guess it just hasn't. It's just not here like it is elsewhere.
Yeah.
So that's why most things are just opening up and staying open. No real fear of it being shut down. I think phase 4 is like next week, and that's pretty much, they wanted phase 4 at July 4th, and I think they're on track for that. So hopefully things just open up completely next week.
I bet you it would be a different story if all of your university students were there.
Oh yeah, because we have 3 universities.
And they'd be having all their Corona parties, right?
Oh yeah.
Isn't that
And,
Alabama or something like that? They came out saying the students are all like purposefully trying to see who gets sick first. Stupid.
Really?
Yeah.
They're toying around with ideas about how to bring students back. They were thinking about, we're just going to bring the freshman class in, and everybody else will stay online. I don't quite understand the logic of that, but they just want to find a way to get kids back on campus without being crowded.
Yeah.
Which is, there's really no way to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's either they're all in or they're not.
Mm-hmm.
And all 3 universities are, well, 2 colleges and 1 university, but they're still on the fence. They haven't figured out what to do yet or how they're going to handle it.
Mm-hmm. So
But yeah, it's not like what's happening in California or pretty much anywhere else.
yeah, anywhere, even here in Nevada, we're having issues.
How's Vegas?
Yeah, it's a problem. You know, all
It
of
is,
the restaurants, you know, that were in such a hurry to open back up, and even casinos, a lot of them have already had to do at least one cycle of closing again and disinfecting, you know, because someone tests positive.
Okay, so
And there's multiple situations of contact tracing happening on my Facebook page. That's what's scary. It's like everybody was feeling so confident and like, yeah, let's get back to work and get back to life. And then a few weeks later, they're posting, oh, I went to 3 different parties last week and I'm just letting you guys all know that you should go get tested. It's like, I'm glad I stayed home. I'm just, you know, doing my virtual tea parties and, you know, I'll stay happy that way.
yeah, my parents went down to Florida, and they were in this bar, and it was very strict, 50% capacity only. Hold on. Right. And they were there one night, and the health inspectors came in and says, okay, you know, you have the capacity right, but everyone's too close. And they said, basically, it's a 1-strike rule. And they said, so, you know, we're going to be back, and if it happens again, we're going to have to shut you down. And they came back the next night, saw that nothing changed, and they suspended their license.
Oh, wow.
So it's like, even though it's only half capacity and they got that part right, and they're following the rules in that respect, it's just that still everyone's crowded around the bar.
Yeah.
So you have to do, but Florida, I know, is really trying to get a little bit more, they're trying to enforce it, I guess, better.
Yeah, they have to.
They said health inspectors are everywhere all the time. You just assume they're coming in the door. They're the next person coming in the door.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if they're doing that here in Vegas. Although I'm supposed to have my health inspection. You know, my annual is supposed to, for the past 2 weeks, they've been supposed to do that, and they haven't come. So maybe they are, you know, at capacity. You know, inspecting the places that are having people in, because I'm not having anybody here. I'm closed to the public, and I'm going to continue being that way for a while. So yeah, Ray, I have like a tea room here in Vegas. I'm based in Las Vegas, and I have a warehouse, and then this is the office, and then I have a pretty nice sized tea room with a huge tea table that like 20 people can sit at. I love my tea table.
Too many people.
Yeah, it's a lot of people. Yeah, but it's okay. It's manageable. Huh, Jeremy? It's manageable, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Jeremy came for a tea party I had. It was the World Tea and Music Festival. I put that on every year. He came last year, and I think we had close to 200 people come through that event at some point throughout the night. It was pretty crowded.
Yeah.
We have like bands
I would say
playing,
that.
and yeah, we do a lot of cool stuff here. A lot of fun.
There's probably at least 80 people there at all times,
Yeah.
right? But in a couple hundred throughout the night, yeah.
But I have like a big roll-up door on my warehouse, so I can open that up, and then it kind of like block party the outside, the back alley. So that's how we're able to fit so many people. But sadly, all that space going to waste now. It makes me so sad. Can't use it. So yeah, the purpose of today, or the topic of today, we wanted to continue the conversation from Tuesday's panel, the Not Just Tea panel. Jeremy, did you watch that? Did you have a chance to participate?
Yeah, I was there. I listened to it all.
Good.
I watched it all.
So yeah, maybe we'll start with asking your reflections on it. What did you think, or did you have any questions or any inspiring thoughts come from it?
I don't know about inspiring. But it was really good. Because you had so many different perspectives all going after the same topic. I mean, it wasn't just, I've been to way too many panels where it's for the same person.
Yeah.
So at least in this respect, it was really sort of dynamic in that you were really, I think you were all feeding off each other really effectively. And the conversation never slowed down and never got off track. And it did, and it ran long and it was still too short. I think everyone was complaining about that. Like, we were all prepared to sit through 3 or 4 hours if you were willing to do that. But no, I liked it. I mean, I really enjoyed it.
What do you feel about that topic? Because I know that you think about these topics often, in spirituality and the importance of respecting someone and empowering someone's spirituality. What do you feel about the importance of preserving cultures and indigenous knowledge?
If I were to, it's like if I had the chance to jump in on the panel, what I would have talked about is, you very much have the living tea, dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
But my whole thing is much more different, because my whole thing is I'm not too concerned about what the tea is now. The only thing I'm really concerned is what the tea will become. And that's the idea of it being the transformation of the tea leaf. My big fear is it's too soft of a story. It needs to toughen up in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's fantastic when you talk about the living leaf and really sort of keeping its nature and all of that. But I think in a way it doesn't attract a male audience.
Huh.
And we need to create a stronger storyline. So, so that's when when I do my projects, it's all about the tea leaf suffering and dying and being reborn, sort of the tea leaf as a hero, as it has its own story to tell.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than it sort of preserving the nature it has, my whole thing is that it's transforming to something completely new.
Yeah.
Maximizing its potential. I think there's a stronger story to tell there. I think that throughout that whole panel, I think that's where that's what I would have contributed. I understand the stories that you want to tell, but from my point of view, from the new customers I've gained,
mm-hmm.
they're much more interested in having a more dynamic story to tell.
Yeah.
And the tea leaf gives you the opportunity. There's so many different types of tea types and leaves, and they all have a different process. So you have this endless supply of stories to tell.
Yeah. Well, and then there's also the story of the surroundings of that tea leaf and the people and their understanding of the tea leaf. Because Ray was talking about, in living tea, you're listening to the tea. As a tea master, you're listening to the tea and letting, finding the way to best express the tea through your processing. That's also part of the story. So yeah, Jeremy, maybe so Ray can understand a little bit of context, because your story is very unique. Your company and your brand and the way that you're trying to introduce tea to people is very unique. Maybe
Yeah.
if you can give like a really brief context for her.
Yeah, essentially what I started is a company called Exalted Teas, and our initial audience is Catholics. So we're hyper focusing on that market. And the reason is that it's a really effective way to teach the theological concept of transformation and suffering and the meaning and importance it has in your life. So when I found out it was such an effective tool to teach all these things in a very easy and accessible way, I decided to sort of turn all my efforts and just make the company around that. Tea is a teaching tool. But it's like, you do have the farmers and the pickers and everything, that entire story. But typically when people tell that story, it stops at the leaf and it needs to kind of go on and go further. Mm-hmm. How is the leaf processed? What happened to it? Because essentially it effectively dies. Then we bring it back to life. So it's like the stories are kind of almost being handed off along the way. So you can go all the way back, all the way through who packs, who drinks, and everything. Mm-hmm.
Did you read the Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane?
I haven't, no.
Yeah, read it, Jeremy. Very important. Because I think, it could add extra dynamics and dimensions to these stories too. Even that story of a culture suffering, like a culture and a cultural identity being oppressed, and kind of hidden away for generations, and then for it to come back. Like those stories are still there. And the woman that wrote, Lisa C., she great storyteller, and even in the way that she described, I love the scene like where the girl first sees the ancient tea trees, and the way that she describes, like all the growths on it and like the layers of stories just through, the biological makeup of these trees. Yeah, just additional dimensions.
I wonder to what extent, it's important to go back, because I think if you're too far removed from the origin, people have a tendency to reshape the story. But ideally what you should do is go as far back as you can to the origin, mm-hmm. and sort of get back to sort of the core culture of it. But, it's like, to what extent are we allowed to create our own culture? Like right. The modern culture.
That's important, Jeremy. It's really important. Yeah.
It is, how are we gonna, because instinctively we want to integrate all of our beliefs and our actions into what's happening right now and today. But we lose track of the past. So it's just a matter of figuring out like how much, it's like you got to go all the way back to go forward. But I think there really is an opportunity now to develop as sort of this modern culture. I think you guys were touching on that at the end when you were talking about like how to get more people to drink good tea. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like, in a sense, it's like marketing in a way that you have to make it more of a lifestyle. Because what I learned when I was dealing with customers, health benefits, all of that stuff doesn't really sell the tea. You have to sell the lifestyle around tea. Mm-hmm. But I think if it's more well defined, then I think, it could be, I don't want to say marketed, but I think that's what you'd have to do.
What about the idea of, through your marketing and through your brand building, involving the tea lover into the story? Ray, who's here? Who came?
That's Mafalda.
Oh, Mafalda's here. Hello. Oh, she's on mute.
So I think what interests me, and Jeremy, I really appreciate the point of view that you bring to this, that a lot of the narrative that I have gotten from my mentors like Elise, like Ray, like Sohan, is kind of along the lines of this, of like the idea of ahimsa, where we let the tea grow and do and be as it is, when the reality of the producing of the drinkable product is actually very violent.
Yeah.
We're almost like softening the story by focusing on just the ecological nice soft parts of being respectful to the plant.
Yeah. I think, and it's because you can liken it, because everybody can share that story, because there's suffering in life always. It's going to be there. You can't avoid it. It's just how you deal with it. You can either sort of avoid suffering. You could transcend it, which is a way of sort of ignoring it. But what the tea leaf does is, in a way, it's something unique, because the tea leaf was chosen and it had no choice in what was about to happen to it. So the tea leaf essentially embraces the suffering. And when you do that, you actually allow it to transform you into something new and into something better. So it was such a good lesson to help. I mean, it's just an easy way to help people understand, not only does it happen everywhere throughout nature, the fact that you can actually, it's like with tea, you can actually enjoy the benefits of something having transformed for you. And so that's what makes the tea leaf a more personal story. But I think that story needs to be told. Everything just needs to be more dynamic in a way. It's kind of like, tea needs to toughen up, because it goes through a horribly violent process. And I think that story should be told, because it's much more interesting.
Can I ask Jeremy, how much you share in terms of the history of tea, as in when it involves war and, the toughen up side of the stories? How much can you tell that to your audience, and how much do you choose to tell? Is that part of it, in your view?
Like how tough in the way the story needs to be?
Yeah, I sort of feel, because going on the panel, one of the biggest questions I've been pondering on is how much I'm going to go in this. And this unfolds into a bigger stories that perhaps it's for another subject, on how we choose to tell the story for the tea itself. But my experience, particularly in the UK, is people in general have not heard about the Opium War, or if they heard about it, they do not know this had something to do with tea.
Yeah.
They do not know that tea was stolen. All of these things.
Yeah,
so,
like Opium War and Robert Fortune and.
Yeah, but very small part of it, right? That's a very small part of history. And I guess my question is that sort of a history or storytelling is your way, is what you meant by toughening up the storyline? Is that what you meant?
Yeah, I think it's like one more aspect. I was pitching an idea to someone that I really want to do a presentation, because I did a presentation on the history of tea in America, where I spent half the time talking about the Boston Tea Party and what that meant, how it was done, and what it signified. And I was trying to tell her, I said, what we really need to do, the next presentation needs to be the bloody history of tea. Because it has a very, even it's in historical context, it has a very violent past.
Yes.
And those stories, I think those stories are neglected too. Not neglected as much as they should be told more.
Eric, what did you want to say?
Well, not only has it been bloody, it's been very to governments completely. So there's a lot of corruption behind tea. And yeah.
It was too important of a commodity. There's going to be corruption and violence and bloodshed for it. It was too high. It was too high a demand of a product, and every product like that has that type of history. But you wouldn't think it was tea. Like if you didn't know that history, especially nowadays when you're just enjoying a cup of tea, I think those thousands of years of history that's sort of lost.
I mean, didn't it drive the British colonialization of India?
Yeah, it was. They were trying to get to China. They were stopped by the Dutch, and they landed in India.
Yeah.
But I think that it's super important to tell the true story and to give people now an understanding of how important tea was, that it was just a commodity. And that without darkness, you can't have light. And for people to truly understand the history of tea and how connected tea is, not just to us humans, but to our history, doesn't matter which country you're from, to our global history, and the sacrifices that people had to do throughout years, and the the crimes that were committed for it, is just, it gives people an understanding of how important tea actually is, and give it more of a respect.
Well, and that also like sets a context. It sets more of a context for, like, at least a lot of the work that you've been doing in India and talking about with Darjeeling. It was the culture that really caused the people to go on strike. That it's like, that's just an extension of all of these wars.
Yeah.
Top Sohan?
I found interesting when they were saying that she didn't know how to go about teaching people in England the true history of tea. And I think that is a little bit harder in England, because they have a revised version of history. They really do not understand their past in terms of a major colonist country, and they still truly believe that the English almost invented tea as we have it in the West, and they invented the 5 o'clock tea, and they did all of this. It's a very whitewashed version of history, and anything that goes against it, they kind of take it personally, and they there's a defense.
Yeah.
But I think that expands far beyond just tea.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
This is my story. As a Chinese person who lives abroad, as a non-white, going onto another subject, and running grass people tree here, particularly right now, is I'm honestly sick and tired of the capitalist or whatever colonialist, however you want to define it, come to a land, rip it off, and claim the stories are theirs, and then brainwash everybody and tell them that's a story. I'm sick and tired of that. So, which is why I think it is part of the reason why I wanted to run the education program, is because I think it's important for us to learn directly from the source, where everything originates from, and also is to sort of show that it's not just that story. There could be a different perception, if we're talking about perception, and if we want to make a change. There's a famous saying from my mentor: we all need to be well informed by history before we destroy it. And I think that is the case. People find it, like British culture is to show respect to a culture, then your storytelling should alter to speak to their ears. So from my experience is with British culture, I can't be too confrontational, even though my personal urge is to tell them, why there's milk and sugar in your tea is because of the GDP. It's nothing to do with the culture, and that is made up. And if I just say that, people just, it won't, the grand scheme of things, the outcome won't be achieved. Yeah. So, but I think it's very important that for me to stand up for my own culture, at least a part of the stories that I know, that I've been taught, that I grew up with. And I cross my fingers for everyone else who, like all of us sitting here, to tell your own stories and in your own way. But I think it's important for us not to get too conceptualized in this, in terms of, the concepts. But I think ultimately all of our intentions align, which is to elevate. And the way we choose to tell our stories, of course, should suit the audience, whoever your demographic is, and however you want to tell it. But the history needs to be told.
Definitely. And do it in a way, for me, I've been doing it in a way that I don't really hold any punches. I tell it as it is. Tea was stolen, there was wars, it changed the course of life for, everyone in Hong Kong to start, and the people that got addicted to opium, India, who now has an opium trade, and still maintains until today, all of that, even the Boston teapot, how important tea was to so many of the historical events, but really to go deep into the culture across the ocean, because that is something that I've been struggling a little bit now with, not wanting to take the attention out of the history of tea, but I found some of the people of the tea community a little bit disappointing in how they weren't stepping up for the principles that I believe tea holds, which is equality and understanding and open talk about the current situation worldwide. But also, if we're going back to the Chinese tea history, about the Chinese tea history and how we can take advantage of Gong Fu without appropriating it and without maintaining this idea that it's somehow exotic and it's somehow something that we discovered. This is something that has been around for centuries, and in a way for us to take advantage of it for our own personal development, but without appropriating it, making our own rituals, or telling the true history. I think that those are extremely important, and we all should make a point in saying it's not about politics, it's not about anything. This is what it actually happened. The history that you've been told, that you believe, might not be exactly what happened.
We do that when the time is right. Yeah, I'm all about this, and I'm with you on this. But I think to some people, you have to break it down to 100 steps for them. For some people, you can just do it like that. They get it, and you can go as deep, as raw as you want. They're there to listen or to learn or to embrace. I think sometimes this is something I learned about sharing the story of tea, is actually learning about myself. I constantly tend to go over, and to feel like people aren't ready for this. I can't go too deep about this because, it's gonna make it too confrontational, or the other way around. Or sometimes I go over and do too much. I always worry about it. But I think it's a bit like turning up as a jazz gig. You sort of just suss out what the situation is, what everyone else is playing, what the vibe is, and you flow with it in terms of storytelling, I think.
Ray, I think it's interesting to note that you're saying it helps to be less confrontational, and Mafalda saying I pull no punches. There is a difference between the narrative when it's told by you, Ray, as a Chinese person, and when it's told by Mafalda as a Portuguese Australian person, a Portuguese person in Australia. And that's that there's this phenomenon I've noticed in the tea world, in the world of Chinese tea, where ironically, the more Chinese you are, the less credibility you have. And this comes from a deeply ingrained narrative of white supremacy, and also the idea that white people are trustworthy and Chinese people are crooked and they'll cheat you. Everyone talks about how easy it is to get cheated in China. And that extends to me as a Chinese American. I've had people seeing my name, seeing that my name was Chinese, and being less likely to trust me as an importer than a white person, like many of the white tea or bitter leaf teas, who are cool guys. I've got a problem with those guys, but they get this extra boost of credibility for not being Chinese. And in some cases, the narrative is that anyone who tells you that the trees are 800 years old is full of shit. Anyone who tells you they know the name of the tea master is full of shit. All of this information that we traditionally associate with the value of tea is bullshit that crooked Chinese people make up to con Westerners. And it's a very convenient narrative because it takes the credibility away from the people to whom the culture belongs, and it places, so now where is the credibility? Why is the person saying that 800-year-old trees are bullshit more credible than a Chinese farmer saying these trees are 800 years old? Because their tea is expensive, and because they're white. And that's what gives them a credibility edge. When Ray goes and is confrontational with somebody about the history of tea, then she comes across, it's like the angry black woman phenomenon. A person of color who's advocating on behalf of their own race is perceived as angry. Whereas a Mafalda or someone else who is not a Chinese person who is talking about things that were done to Chinese people or to Chinese society by tea, by the Opium Wars, will be perceived as being confrontational or argumentative or bitter. And so I think it's a really interesting point to bring up that there is this credibility gap. And Ray, the difference in y'all's approaches really speaks to that Ray is going to have to sugarcoat her narrative. Even if she's saying the same thing as Mafalda, she's going to have to sugarcoat it a little bit so she doesn't come across as a bitter, angry Chinese person who has a problem with white people. Whereas Mafalda has instant credibility for not being Chinese. She has nothing to gain from the narrative that the Chinese were victimized by Western society.
Yes, I think this applies to any culture that had been claimed. Is you to be able to reverse it or get the audience to listen to it, you need to find a white face to tell the stories. And what has been the case for tea, for rituals in Africa, for a lot of things, And that to me is, it is what it is, the way how things are. But I sort of feel like I can't really think what I'm doing is changing the world. I can only do what I can and tell the story how I tell it, because I'm here where I am now. It's just, and I really, even though I wanted things to progress, but that is my own personal hope, and hope is very spiritually materialistic, I think. So I think sometimes it's just to focus on doing and hope for the best.
Ray, I really like what you said about the space to tell stories. And I like what both you and Sohan said just in terms of how you communicated the complexities of communicating, and how, there's kind of jumping to the super meta level on two different things, is that the way that our brains work is that we associate patterns so that we can essentially feel safe. And so there's a flaw in the way that we are fundamentally wired, that we look for those biases. And it's a cognitive challenge to continually break them and look for them when you're in them. And the other aspect is, from a linguistic perspective, is that when we're communicating, the context of the language that we're actually using is itself flawed, because it is a finite representation of an infinite experience, and the language that we use, presuming that we're both using the same language, is tied to our experiences of each individual word in that language, which is, I pulled this book off of my shelf, the meaning of meaning, which is, I don't recommend anyone read it, but it's super dense, and yeah. But the opening line is, the purpose of this book is not to learn to speak perfectly, but to understand what it means to speak imperfectly. And I think, Ray, you nailed it with the space to tell stories, because it's this aspect of listening and then finding the space to tell the story that matches where that person is at, so that instead of being angry and saying, you got to listen here, this is how it is, making space for them to overcome the bias that they might not see because they're in it, and tell a story and, oh, I didn't know about that. And I think that is the work, that is the beauty, that is the point of strength that you and Sohan, I felt in what you were saying, that what you both were doing is telling those stories to make space for people to just have that little moment of realization of, oh, that's not what I thought it was. And also dimensionality.com is available, which was why I giggled when you were talking about something super potent, but tied into that.
I know that Sohan has read this article, but I don't know if any of you have, from Scott Morrison, from his blog about drinking tea in discomfort. And he talks about the history that tea has, and how we are very reluctant to be confronted with the truth, and how to go about it, and how to break our own biases, and how to be open to changing our minds. And I think that globally we are going through a social, hopefully, awakening, and understanding that our own experiences do not define truth, and that there's other people's experiences and other people's truths that are as valid, if not more, than our own. So I'm hoping that this can be translated into tea as well, and that people will be more aware and do their own research, instead of just believing, the revised history that they are taught in schools, or the half story. Have you guys read it? Have you guys read Scott Norton's article? No?
I didn't read it, but I shared it in the comments, and I'll share it in the chat here too, so everybody can get access to it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. I saw it, I just didn't click on it, and I when I saw it, I was like, oh, that's probably a good article.
Yeah, it's really relevant to tea. The whole movement that is happening right now. I think that the tea industry and the community can take a lot of lessons from it.
I think there's a question we need to ask ourselves here, right? With what's going on right now, particularly with the pandemic, with Black Lives Matter, and everything else that is going on collectively in terms of the consciousness, I think there is an urge within our human nature to go out and help, and to demand change, and to ask for justice and fight for it. But this is my personal point of view. I think everyone's missing a point a little bit, because I think without having done the work within yourself first, it's far easier for you to go out and say, we want justice, we want this, we want that. Because if ultimately, just even talking about self-care, self-respect, self-growth, and you're learning, how do you sit with yourself? Do you know yourself as a being? How do you take responsibility of yourself before you go out and want to change the situation that is out there? that applies to everything, applies to the situation, the industry we're in, just as we are. You know, it's very, I think the first question we need to ask ourselves is, have we done enough work for ourselves? Do we know where our boundaries are in terms of our mental, physical, spiritual growth and well-being? And before we go out and say we need to change the history or whatever we aspire to do. So I think the work is quite, you know, it's a lot of work in terms of educating ourselves. And then because we're a very lucky bunch in the tea community, because we have tea to help us do that, to learn the sound of the silence, to find wisdom and sort of connect with yourself and find the innate wisdom and power within ourselves before we decide what we're going to do with the external world. And I think, you know, to reflect on what Brian said, I think whatever we choose to speak, whatever the language is, whatever the words are, and however we form our thoughts, it's just subjective. It's you know, it's not what, you know, if we're just talking about what life is and how we are as being, as human, as animal, there's a gap. So we're constantly using our intellects to boss us around, do things, make change, but we don't know how to access to that, you know, the intelligence within our intuition to do what we need to do. So I sort of, I felt like to be able to go on this in a less biased way, whatever situation or experience that provides us to do what we want to do. I think it's very important that we tap in within ourselves first and ask ourselves a few very crucial questions.
Well, it's almost like the idea of, it's super cliche, but like, be the change that you want to see in the world. But the idea that if we were all doing this work, we wouldn't have to be out in the streets chanting that we want justice, because we would be treating each other the way that we want to be treated. We would be respectful of each other. Like a lot of the change that we're seeking from the outside world, I can't cause somebody else to change in the way that they might, I hesitate to say need to, but it's kind of like you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Sam, go ahead.
No, what's up, Sohan?
I was gonna, yeah, I'll sit on the tractor. I was sitting on the tractor and talk about tea. I'm in a tractor. Yeah. Here's the big boy stuff we do in the tea house. Getting lumber, breaking up asphalt, being on a tractor, getting wood. Yeah, we've got a pickaxe. But anyway, yeah, we're renovating the garden back here. Here we go. Careful, little dog. All right, but what I was going to say is that Sam, you make a really good point, because people talk about racism like it's an alien species trying to destroy us and that we all have to fight it together. We do not have to fight it together. Black people do not need to fight racism. White people need to fight racism because it's something that's inside of them. It's inside of all of us, but when it's inside of white people, that makes it possible for the atrocities that we're protesting about to happen. And Sam, you're right. If everyone was doing the internal work, we wouldn't need to go out and protest in the streets. But I think the people who are going out and protesting in the streets have done some of that internal work to get where they are, or they're a person of color. But the white people who are out there in the streets chanting and marching, they've done some of the internal work probably to get them there. If every other person would do their internal work, then those few people out there protesting wouldn't need to be out there. But I don't think it's safe. I don't think it's safe to say, oh, if all these protesters would go home and work on themselves, then the problem would be fixed. No, all the non-protesters need to work on themselves. The protesters need to bring it to their attention that that's work that needs to be done. I think because I agree, I fundamentally agree with what you're saying, Sam, and also you, Ray, that the work to be done is internal work. And some people aren't doing that work, and they need some kind of social pressure to get them to confront difficult things to do that work. But yeah, that's kind of my take on it, is that it's not like, sometimes I feel like when white people are, and I know we're talking about Black Lives Matter and it just comes up again and again, but it's relevant to the discussion because of the nature of the thing. If all people are doing the work, but especially white people, if all white people were doing the work to understand that racism exists, then racism would stop existing. You know what I mean? So it's not like we all need to go out and go into battle against an enemy army. The enemy army is within us, and that is internal work that needs to be done. Not political work. Before the political work be done, before the social work be done, the internal work needs to be done.
Definitely. Totally get what you're saying. And I mean, at a certain level, is there also, and I guess this gets more into like the spiritual beliefs of things. I mean, at a certain level, there's the idea that human beings are flawed individuals. And these are part of our this is part of our flaws, and learning to live with, learning to forgive each other for these kind of, that's really where the load gets heavy.
Systems of injustice have always been around, and it is human greed to want to be in a position of power over others. But the whole colonist and racist mindset was invented and created and set up intentionally. History throughout the world has been revised to always show whiteness as equal to superiority. And it is part of our legacy, whether we want it or not. And we have, I say we, because in some countries I'm considered white, in some countries I'm considered brown, but either way, at some point in my life, I definitely benefit from being a pretty light girl. And it's just having that understanding, having that work being done, but also the realization that although we're not the ones who set up this system and this unconscious bias that we all have, we have to be the ones to dismantle it. Because it's not the people of color, it's not the victims, that the responsibility does not lay on them. They already suffered enough, they already been through enough. It's our turn to say sorry, to make reparations, and to dismantle this, and to teach kids and the newer generations that how dumb this was, and how ridiculous this was, and how hurtful and damaging for centuries it has been, not just in America, not just in China, everywhere. Racism is everywhere, and the repercussions are felt throughout people's lives. So I think that it's really important for us to definitely do the work. Of course, we have to do the work, but I don't believe that everyone is willing to do so. There's always going to be the racist uncle or the racist grandmother, or people that were born in different times, and I see such pushback from them as if you were telling them that the way that they are is not the correct way, which is not. But moving on, I think that the hope is in the new generations and in kids, and I don't want to delay progress, but inside I really do believe that true progress and equality and a new system will come out of it, hopefully, but I'll probably not be alive for it. But in the meantime, there's always things that can be addressed and that can be changed, and there's always progress that can be had.
even if it's small. You could travel a long distance with a lot of little baby steps.
Yeah, I just hope that it's not the rhetoric that I have been seeing so far in my lifetime. You know, one step forward, and then there's a pushback, and there's two steps back. I just hope that it's not the same, that because white people are on the streets, that step forward will keep itself forward.
I think the majority of people, I don't want to generalize it, I think now there's a collective energy of wanting things to change, or people are learning more about it. But I think the majority is still I'm going to call these people with very strong preferences. I don't know how to call them. They have a very fixed idea of how things are, and, you know, very little room for other ideas to come in. So they have very strong preferences. And these are not the people I focus my energy on. Because if I think myself as a person living in this world with this life that I have, yeah, I probably have another, 30, 40, 50 years. I see this very realistically. I speak my stories to people who have the openness and curiosity, or, you know, wanted to just I spend my time with people who vibe with me, to put it very bluntly. And these are the people that I can tell my story to, and they will feel it. They would vibe with it. They would have a reflection or not. That is actually out of my control. What I can control is the way I tell the story, and the truthness in the storytelling. And that's all I can do, and I keep on doing that. But the rest of it is not, you know, it's not me being fatalist, but I think it's recognizing myself as a human. It's a very insignificant thing in the grand scheme of things. And also to sort of realize where my energy and boundary lies, and do the work so I can keep my focus on doing my work. And that, in marketing terms, we call it talking to a niche market, or whatever that is.
I think I've found resonance in that regard with, you said not all people, you know, not all are ready for it, or some people don't buy. You kind of talking about others. That area of energetics, just to be super broad, I've felt a new kind of emergence of sadness, because I see that ideology, that logic coming from authoritarian technology, which is co-opting the need for human connection and a desire for convenience in the pursuit of corporate and technological dominance. Like, if you look at the progression of social media over the course of the last 15 years, programmatically, human beings have been led to binary ideologies, sensationalist messages, and we're trapped. I mean, so in the same way, when you feel like you can't breathe, the tightness in your chest, and you put your phone down, you go outside, you feel wholly different. Same thing. And so these people who post on Facebook and they are outraged, and they're, you know, throwing stuff in a Walmart because they're being forced to wear a mask because, you know, their rights. I see those people as trapped. I see those people as imprisoned in a box that they cannot see, that they cannot touch, and just making space for that, whether it be sadness, whether it be pity, making space for it. It's not them. Like, I don't see it as them. It's this cloud that is shrouding them, but it doesn't mean that the light inside of that cloud is not there. It doesn't mean that is not valued. It doesn't mean that they are inherently bad. It means that they've been led to this other place, that this dimension of darkness, of shadow. And yeah, I mean, I think that the work our work is while during the beginning of this, I was writing a message to a group of friends that had invited us to share July 4th. And we've been moving through a lot of energy for weeks on whether or not to do that with a group of 8 people who have all been communicating for the last 3 weeks on this particular gathering and how everybody can do their work to feel safe, and that they're all doing their homework to be educated, and that, you know, we can all communicate something that's very difficult to communicate. And I'm writing a message to say we're not coming, because this is our choice. We're choosing to go inwards and shut down, unplug, and not celebrate this holiday, for a variety of reasons. But then at the same time not being like, and you should do that too, because you're being super, right? Like, we don't want to take away from what they're experiencing, because we love them and we would also like to experience it. So it's like this delicate balance of like, we are choosing this work, but we're not projecting it. We're not telling you that you should be in it. And that takes effort, that takes energy. And I think that is the work, those little moments where you spend some extra time and write a text message that's considerate of the person that you're talking to, or you make space for the person who's throwing an ideology in the elevator, and you're like, okay, like, instead of just like running away, being like, I hear what you're saying, like, today could be really difficult, like, there's a lot going on and it's complex, and like, it's prompted a lot of reflection, and you walk away. Like, you don't tell them anything, you don't push anything, you don't try and convince them of anything, you just allow them to feel heard. You acknowledge the difficulty of a concise and cogent and clear path, and you make space for their reflections, which are their own. And sometimes that's done elegantly, and other times not so much, but that's the work.
Such an art to, I consider my work is to be a mirror, and that's very hard to do, because you mirror the space the other person have, and you mirror the questions you see them should be having. But that in itself is very subjective, you know. So I've and this goes back to what I said earlier. There's always an urge for us to go over that line, but merely, I think, is not about speaking per se. It's really about learning how to listen. And the other person, when they speak, you listen and you reflect back what they said, so they can go and form their own questions and finding their own answers to those questions. And I think that is so hard to do. Such an art takes practice also.
It is a practice.
He definitely makes it easier.
Ray, I know you said you only had an hour, so if you need to go, you can go. But I did want to touch on the question that you had for me about, and it's a little off topic. It's on topic, but it's kind of changing the direction of where we're going in the conversation. But you,
we need to come out. We dug too deep the hole. Please drag us out.
It's totally related. It's just coming from a different perspective. But you had asked about, you know, the potential of ideas of, you know, how to help the people of your home community with the issues that they're facing. And, you know, that's the work that I do. And, you know, not necessarily in China so much. It's mostly in you know, the more conventional developing countries. But you know, I think that there's 2 ways that cultures are lost. One of them is it's appropriated, like straight up stolen. And I think that's like kind of been the angle that we've mostly been talking about here. And then the other way is that people will allow their culture to go. And that is coerced through making people feel insignificant, you know. And I think that that's an issue that happens a lot, is that, you know, a lot of these indigenous cultures, or not even indigenous cultures, but just humble cultures that are just doing their thing, they get colonized, and then they feel insignificant because they're not having the same infrastructure as everybody else, or they're not having the same wealth, and so they start like sacrificing their own culture to try to attain, you know, that thing. So, and there's examples in all types of, you know, racist or colonizing stories. And so I think that something that can be done to address that is normalizing the original culture, or like the original level of humility. And so like in the work that I do, what that is like, you know, I'll be meeting with some farmers and they'll hear about, you know, like pu'er tea and the business of that and how economically developing it's been for certain communities in China. And they want that. They're like, this is what we want to pursue. We just want to. And it's like, well, maybe that's not what you want to pursue. Like what you want to pursue is autonomy and health and community. And that's not always through through money. You know, it never is actually. It's through authenticity. And so I think that, like, you know, and in the development space. So like that's what, before I was doing tea, I was in the development, like international development. So, you know, NGOs, nonprofits, like water nonprofits, healthcare nonprofits that go to like these like suffering communities and provide free aid. You know, like in that world too, you know, it's like there's this like division. It's like, well, we have our developed awesomeness, and we need to help these suffering communities that don't have it. And I think that's actually a very dangerous thing to do. Like I much rather prefer normalizing and almost romanticizing the humility, the simplicity, versus saying, oh, you've got to be like us. You know, I think like that's the origin of the conflict with like the conversation around cultural appropriation of like of like braids, you know, white girls that have appropriated the style of the cornrow braids. And it's like Black women had kind of abandoned that part of our culture because they felt insignificant. They felt like they have to have the relaxed hair. They have to fit more into like the white standard of what it means to look white. And you know, so that's perpetuated out into this whole other, you know, thing of appropriation. You know, when if the white people had supported, you know, their culture and normalized it and been like, that's beautiful, and like that's what we're trying to get to, like natural hair is beautiful, you don't have to try to be like us. And I think that is a step that could help. I don't know if you're understanding what I'm saying. I know I'm kind of like
absolutely. I experienced this myself, because I think capitalism, the damage of capitalism, it's so complex and it goes into so many different levels, even we're just talking about consciousness. And you know, it's so damaging. So to give you an example, I go back to Guizhou. Nowadays there's McDonald's and Starbucks. And I go back and teach. And then when I round up a tea gathering, I say, let's go and have tea. They're like, yeah, here's the address. And I check on the map and it's in Starbucks. and then you're like, no, we're going to meet in the tea house. But all these young people who are 18 to 22, something like that, 16, sometimes a bit younger, they're embarrassed to be seen sitting in the tea house. And I ask them why. Because, you know, again, is to be made feel ashamed of their own culture. And then I have to break it down to them and say, look, Starbucks came in last year and they bought 8 tons of tea as ingredients. And then they go back and make their own blend and then sell it to you for 40 yuan, which is like, I don't know, 4 pounds, more than $5 a cup. And you're sitting there and you're thinking, this is your lifestyle. But if I took the time to explain it to them, they then would understand it. So then they will stop going there. Mm-hmm. But I think for me is just to begin with this, there's such a lack of the understanding of this culture, because there's always other people coming to this culture, either trying to save it or trying to protect it and telling all these local people how they should live their culture. There's a lack of voice, lack of role model who really represent them. So there's lack of education in so many levels. And then in the case of Guizhou, for example, even the Chinese people see Guizhou people as like, the poorest people in the world. And in Shanghai, Shanghainese people would say, in Shanghainese people's mind, there's foreigner, there's local, and there's the villagers. Mm-hmm. So we sit in the villagers category. So this is how we've been viewed by, outside of Guizhou. And we think we're poor because of that. We think we're poor from our mentality. We just think we can't do things. And then there's the international story who come, like Nat Geo came and did a documentary about how poor Guizhou had been. It's exactly a replica of how the stories of Africa have been told to the African people. Never mind the white demographics were shown on the prime time, whatever. But the damage it has done to its own people is they grow up, generations of them growing up thinking they can't do things, they can't achieve. Mm-hmm. And that reflects on the economic setup, on education setup, on social structure, on everything. So then now I sort of feel like, okay, in order to tell the stories of Guizhou, for example, from my point of view, I go back home, film it, make a documentary, but not to show it here on the BBC, but to show it to my own people. This is who I am. This is how the story is of mine. And I'm like you, and here's the culture, here's the story. But I feel that, this sort of level of consciousness is people like my culture, because they've been poor for generations. They don't see it. And for how I see it, it's not about the rich comes and help the poor story. It's not that. It's about how to tell the stories, help these people tell their own stories. I'm sure you resonate doing your work. I'm sure you've seen that from time to time. But I think it's really to help people to have this consciousness. Because of the challenges that we face in front of capitalism and the impacts that had on us, even though it seems so hidden. But just you always have to be so switched on, and it's so exhausting sometimes. Even I just think about it, it's just exhausting.
It's the soft power of other cultures into your own. I think we spoke about this sense of inferiority that we had growing up in our own countries, and how we only discovered how amazing our own countries were once we left and lived everywhere else. And then we started to give value and understand, actually, our countries are a lot better than we thought. And no one else in the world has the traditions and the history and the connection that those things were giving us. I think that it's really important to find the balance there that Elise was saying, because the last thing that you want is the white savior complex, when someone else comes and tells the narrative as they did in Africa, and it's like, you can help them for 50 cents a day. Like that's not going to give them independence. That's not going to give them autonomy. That's just going to create dependence and, instill that mindset that they are not able to do it themselves. And I think that being someone that is from there, to be able to turn that narrative and to be able to be like, I am from there. I'm from Guizhou. I represent you, and I've been everywhere else, everywhere that we grew up thinking that it's better, and I am telling you what we have, no one else does, and it's time for us to give value to it. I think that that is how you turn around. It's not someone else or other cultures coming in and saying, oh, how pretty it is, because then you'll become a tourist adventure. And I've seen that in my own town, in Porto, that has become like a hotspot for tourists. And all of a sudden, our traditional things are, instead of being, made by hand and by artisans, are now being mass produced in whatever country, and being sold as trinkets to tourists. And I don't want that to happen to Guizhou. So to be able to do it in a way that is authentic, in a way that connects to them as I am of you, I am part of you, and it's time for us to open our eyes and see who we are instead of who we're not.
It's very romantic when we talk about this. Yeah, oh, this girl has been going around the world and going back to tell her story. It's so romanticizing, but
it's true.
The challenge I'm facing is I first need to find a way, if I could, but I don't know whether this would be possible, is to first you need to fight the battle of saying, of letting them see that their narratives have been told by by a group of people with very strong preferences of telling stories and claiming other people's. You first need to rip it apart to them about this. And then you need to show them that these stories are not set out to be empowering you and the generations to come. And then your work, your stories comes in to say, hey, this is why I'm doing this. It takes so much explanation and work and just to break it down. Because for my people, like people from Guizhou, they're probably about 20 years behind in terms of seeing this through. So this is what I mean, like you have to break it down for 100 steps, even for your own people, and that's how fucked up it is.
Yeah, when we're letting other people write our stories, I mean, we're always told to be selfless and not be selfish, and in doing that, we let other people's opinions have more weight than our own. So when you start hearing somebody, when you start hearing somebody talk down about the way you are, you start to believe it. And it also depends on like the standards, that if you judge me based on the fact that if you judge me as, because you can't judge me for not being a good basketball player because I have no interest in being a good basketball player. That it's like the richness that I have is not defined by my ability to play basketball, even if somebody else says, well, that's the measure of success. So it's like in that, yes, I'm very poor, but I'm rich in all of these other ways. And if we just listen to the people telling us the ways that we're poor, then we're going to believe that.
The whole story of China, how people see life, richness, and everything is very. I don't have the word for it. It's a very non-Chinese thing. The way of seeing, China is very different. I grew up in the 80s, but the very reason for that is because economically you've been so poor, so all you want is comfort in life and all of that, which is why a lot of people ask me how can you not go back and tell people stop cutting the trees. That's just very, very privileged point of view. Yeah. I talked about this a little bit on the talk. It's if you lived with trauma, with poverty, with everything you could imagine what poverty means, then of course people are gonna need air conditioning. They're not gonna go and work in the field. Of course, it's just within our human nature to seek for comfort and modernity. So it becomes there's never a straight cut to show people, look, you have the mountains, such abundance of nature is so amazing. They just think you're mad, So there's no simple answer to that, and to reflect on, I think I think Sohan said this. He said, China can never be in the right. Whatever China does, the Western will see it. Even China does it the right way, it's suspicious, and the wrong way, and it's just the wrong way. So China can never do the right thing. So I think it's, how China or the Chinese culture have been perceived, and how Chinese people see it, how the way should be. I think there's so many layers of it.
Do you feel like the Chinese cultures romanticize the West?
Yeah, it's not just romanticized, but also from the materialized the lifestyle, the Western lifestyle. The become something everyone wants. Even just like hanging out in Starbucks is a lifestyle, isn't it?
Going to Prada and Gucci and
Yeah, and
the capitalism mindset. But that's the soft power that I was mentioning there. Like, why is the standard of beauty everywhere in the world is the light skin, blue eyes, wide eyes, and blonde, and it's just it's what you see in movies. Is representation is so important because it puts the seed that you're not good enough because you're not American, or because you're not white, or because you're not Western, or whatever it is. It's just, it slowly tells you that you and your country are not good enough, and where you're coming from is just not what is revered everywhere else in the world. You just internalize that.
There's a lack of contemporary role model in this. And just even for like tea, I talk about tea with younger people, then they can relate to it. But if it's like an old Chinese dude with a flask and a bird cage in his hands, you're not gonna listen to him. It's just very easy. And I think that applies to every non-white culture that desperately needs rescuing. We all need to stand up and be that somehow, or just.
But the only rescuer the only rescuer has to come from within.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
The only genuine rescuing that can happen. Otherwise, it's not.
What I mean, I think it's a rest. Sorry, Jeremy, you go.
I say, but we certainly can't depend on that. A lot of people, they can't do the work themselves because in order to do that, they have to admit at some point that they are the cause of the problem, or that they are the source even of their own suffering. And if people aren't prepared to admit to that, the interchange can never really take place. So that's a big ask for people. So it's just one of those things. Realistically, we have to work around that because, let's not give people too much credit.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But I think a lot of this is it's about value. It's basically how American capitalism, how it corrupted the world. Because in America, we have this insane idea that developed probably about the late 19th century that success and ethics are linked. The more successful you are, the more ethical you are. Somehow, success and morals. But there is zero correlation between morals and IQ. Like hundreds of psychological studies have proved this over and over and over again. There's no correlation between IQ and morals. But in capitalism, or the Americanized version of capitalism, the most successful tend to be the most ethical. We link success with ethics. So the things that society values the most, we think is inherently better.
Keep going.
No, I think that was pretty much the gist of it. And then once it really ingrained itself, I think realistically now we're kind of at a breaking point where we're beginning to realize this seems to be a flawed system in a way that we never anticipated before, because now the most successful and the richest people in America are screwing us all.
Yeah.
They're not good people. They're terrible people.
Yeah.
They're corrupt people. But for the longest time, that's the mentality. So like if you went to a movie and you saw it, but if the movie everybody wanted to see is The White Woman, then if they ingrained that value system inside of themselves, they will just instinctively think they are better. So it's really
familiar with the. Talking about value. Value is separate from the word money. Those are two very different things, and so this is. I don't know how to explain it, but one of the passages from it is. Money is essentially a physical expression of victim consciousness. It represents human fear. Our relationship to money is therefore our relationship to fear. There is nothing that reveals a hidden agenda more quickly than the subject of money. Nearly all money, given or received, carries a hidden charge. Our money that is given or received unconditionally has no charge attached. As money is handled in a cleaner way, it will become energetically laundered and manifest one of the great cosmic laws that to give is to receive. The most successful businesses of the future will be based on the 45th gift of synergy. This is the 55th. These kinds of businesses will no longer be based on competition, but will be transparent and highly efficient, because greed and fear are actually highly inefficient.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And the more, it's just, the world is becoming more and more secular, more and more materialistic. So that's just, it's distorting things to the point where money becomes, all these lines are getting blurred.
Yeah.
Once the money takes supreme value, suddenly everything is slowly being attached to wealth.
And the scarcity that go ahead.
No, please.
I was to say that the scarcity that capitalism is based on is an illusion, because if we were all one utopian society, there's plenty of resources on the planet for all of us to thrive. The capitalism itself is fundamentally flawed, and coincidentally we just watched John Adams on HBO, and you see like the birth of our nation and the governance and why it was born, because of the oppressive governance coming from afar, and then you see the founders like starting this government. They're like, we don't know what the fuck we're doing. They're like, already in the first presidency they were already seeing like, this is wrong, this is bad. But snowball. It's really challenging to get something to stop once it's already rolling, and that's where we are. We've had 300 years of systemic bias and unconscious thought, and now that we have that hindsight, it's up to us to roll the snowball back up the hill and over the other side, and it'll probably take another 400 years.
Also, I don't think that secularism and capitalism are correlated, and materialism is correlated, because you see monarchies, you see like way before democracy was the common or the way of governing, and there was always greed, there was always the need for power, and money brings power. So I don't think they're immediately correlated. I actually think, I would love to believe that we're going into a society where it's all open source and there's no competition as it is today, and people see trading more than with money, and just being able to establish a more equalitarian society. But I don't think that the reason why we are where we are now has to do with a secular point of view. I think it actually has to do with the droplets that what we had from the past, and this belief that individualism and putting yourself first, and that the measure of success is how much money you have, how many materialistic things you have. You know, it's just that was something that were put on us as a way to reach happiness, to reach success. You need to be rich. You need to be, and that allowed, well, a lot of psychopaths and people that have no morals and no problems with screwing everyone else to reach positions of power. That's not going to be released.
Yeah. It's interesting you say the power, and after this conversation, I'm feeling called to distinguish the difference between the perception of power in the capitalistic model that is dominant throughout the world today and the true nature of power, which I would say is more in line with something like Taoism, which is alignment with nature. And I think that we're in the space where people like us are gathering together with these types of perspectives and saying yes, and then creating that understanding within ourselves, that acknowledgement with each other, and the perpetuation of that signal outside.
Brian, have you seen that meme? What gives
that
people
meme?
Feelings of power?
I've seen all the memes.
What gives people feelings of power? And then the first option's money, the second, and it's small, and the second status, and it's a little bit bigger, and then the last one has the biggest bar, and it says growing a tomato. That's it. You know, so if we can normalize this idea, so much can come from it. That like real power and real happiness doesn't come from these things that like our society has convinced us. It's simple things. It's seeing something being born from a seed, which is why people often say that having a child, you know, your own body creating that kind of power changes your life, you know.
Gives a different perspective.
Yeah.
I really do, like in the beginning of the pandemic, I was hoping that would be the trigger to bring that understanding to people. That it doesn't matter how much money you have or how successful you are at your job, what title you have, or what kind of house, or whatever materialistic things you have. That does not guarantee you health, that does not guarantee you happiness. And sometimes, you know, having a little veggie garden will actually guarantee you food supply instead of being dependent on supermarkets.
Yeah.
You know, I was hoping that with this pandemic that's the message that people come out of it with.
I mean, like how to bake bread and how to grow gardens and all that stuff was trending on Google. So like it's happening. Like as long as we acknowledge the time scale, it's definitely happening.
It is.
You know, it's going to be something that our grandkids benefit from more significantly than we do, but it's happening.
I hope so, because it's a rude awakening to realize that the system that you are a part of might not be able to keep you safe as you thought you were. And it might break down that ego that we have, that we are above nature, that we are above everything else. We are humans, we are intelligent, we are sentient. Like, bugger all of that. Mother Nature is inventing new ways of waking us up and making us realize how humble we need to be and how much more connected we need to be if we want to survive.
Thank you for re-prompting me to make moves on. We joked around about creating ego death as a service for influencers, And so I think that now needs to become an ad to see what happens.
I just wanted to let you guys know that on YouTube there is a tea farmer from India that's watching. I don't know him. I'm gonna get to go know him after this is over. He came across the video on YouTube and he's watching it live, and he wrote, "Much money is not peace, and I do not know who is peaceful with money." Smiley face. You know?
It's funny because the people that do have money, and when they are interviewed, they say exactly that, that they thought that they would be immune to certain problems once they had money for some reason. There's like the belief that we had that once you have money, everything is going to be okay. But once you do have money, you don't trust the people around you. You don't know if they're authentic or not. And you don't have the same type of support network that you would if you were able to invest more in the relationships that you have around you than in the ambition and the pursuit of, being better than everyone else by making more money than everyone else sort of mentality.
But Biggie Smalls said, "More money, more problems," and it got him shot.
That's true.
Well, he had a lot of money.
Not really. He would have had a lot of money if he would have lived.
But he was already talking about having a lot of money, and people don't know. They see him on TV. They thought he probably does.
Oh yeah.
This is the thing, right? People have to go through it in order to see it themselves. We obviously, we lived our lives, and in order for us to even have a conversation like this today, and this is just our own life experiences. But I think the majority of people, it's just, to me, it's so big, the collective confusion. And you sort of, I feel like I need to let it go from my own personal perspective that we are going to get to the end of the world at some point, because the changes are happening and not fast enough to reverse it back, I don't know how many hundreds of years. So
yeah, I kind of am like present in the work, but acknowledging that if a solar flare hits us in 15 minutes, there's kind of nothing we can do. So just like it's like acknowledging the control, acknowledging the eternal existence of spiritual life, and doing the work that your physical body can do in this time, and then absolving yourself of anxiety that's outside of what can be. I mean, there's certainly illusions of control. I with that a lot, because I'm present in the work, like change the world by changing within and making space for others, and then you're like, the environmental disaster, and oh my god, and yeah, it's
exhausting.
A lot of breathing. Yeah,
I
had a quote somewhere. It was like, all spiritual and physical growth requires suffering. So I'm like, yay, growth.
Yeah.
Jeremy
True.
likes that.
Something tea leaves.
I'm building a whole business based on that.
You're ahead of your time.
Everything that is happening right now is the causes and conditions that happened to before, This is why we're standing here right now talking about Taoism and talking about, I think I often question myself, like, who are you to even trying to go think you can fix the world? We're so tiny in the grand spectrum, not even time, because time is such a made-up thing in the grand scheme of space and the universe and everything. And as human, we're such a tiny bunch, and we constantly think we can control everything and change and fix, but the world is still gonna just rotate and do its own thing. And I sometimes think, not even a fire that burns capitalism can we restart again. It's just, so just be in the moment, I guess, do what we do. I'm gonna say that and say bye because it's almost midnight and I need to sleep in order to
Wake up tomorrow and make that money.
do my work tomorrow. Thank you all for your wisdom. Sam, good to see you, and good to see you drinking the tea from Twitter. And thank you everyone for your wisdom and for listening.
Thank you.
About
Thank you for joining us.
Take care.
Thank you for coming, and thank you for staying up super late.
Thank you.
Thank
Rest
you
well.
Thank you. So good to meet you and hear you.
Bye.
Yeah.
Well, that was special.
Yeah.
It was good. We had Sohan. We had Sohan for a little bit too. You know, he's got a lot of good things to say.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think I am actually going to have to sign off as well. I have a number of things that have not been getting done that are saying we need to get done.
That's good.
Before I do though, Mafalda, can I see the painting on your wall?
Yeah, it's my mother-in-law's.
That I can't tell what it is, but I can tell I want to see the rest of it.
Oh wow.
Yeah, she got it in Thailand. It was. Oh, hello.
Yeah, you're here.
Wow.
Very nice.
It's a beautiful painting.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure. She didn't have it up. She had it in her latest, her previous house, and I always found myself just staring at it. And then I found it in the garage. She didn't have a place to put it in this new house, and she gave me this room to do the tea room. And I'm like, I'm definitely going to put that there because every time that I look at it, I just get lost in thought and in this type of internal conversation.
Tea Talks is serious business.
So serious. It is. No, we tackle some pretty heavy topics.
We do.
In a very silly way sometimes.
Yeah, we have fun doing it. It was probably the most important thing.
Yeah.
So thank you guys all for coming. I appreciate you all.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for making the space, Sam.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for coming in and filling it with beauty.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this was a very, very good conversation. Thank you.
Hi guys. I'll see you next week.
All right, bye everybody.